Welcome to the Intentional Health for Women podcast. I'm your host, Garrett GQ Query. This podcast is dedicated to developing intentional health for women. Former 400-pound fat man turned health and fitness professional, specializing in women's health. In this podcast, you will find over a decade of experience in the health and fitness industry, serving women to become their most intentional self through strength training, nutrition, and lifestyle practices. Each week, we will dive into a variety of different topics, ranging from interviews with women leading the way in the health and fitness industry, client case studies throughout the years, myth busting, social media trends, female hormones, gut health, and so much more. We are not normal. We are intentional. Welcome to another episode of the Intentional Health for Women podcast. I'm your host, Garrett GQ Query, and I'm joined by a good friend, colleague, Allie. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We originally met through Sam Miller's program, FNMS, I've been involved with Sam now for 4 years.
Yeah.
I don't know when.
I think it was 2.5 years ago. It was his May workshop in Raleigh, 2022, I believe.
Got it.
Yeah.
That was the first time.
Yes.
Yeah. And you knew the girls.
That was actually the first time I met them as well. Yeah. So that was the first time I got to meet everybody in our little FNMS cohort. So very exciting.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
And now you work with Sam still, maybe a little bit?
Just as an alum for FNMS.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So you're still involved in that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of what brought us all together as far as that goes. We have an episode with Sam. So with that being said, tell us a little bit about yourself, like childhood, kind of brought up to speed as far as that goes. You were an athlete growing up. Right?
Yes.
Super small town in Texas.
Super small town in Texas. We literally had one stoplight. We got our second stoplight my sophomore or junior year of high school. So when I say tiny, yeah, it was tiny. I had less than 100 people in my graduating class. But I always joke that in our town, you either did drugs or you played sports. There were other things to do, but there really wasn't much else to do growing up. So I was very much a high achiever. We were chatting a little bit before this podcast, and Garrett asked, is that from your parents? And really, it was a lot of self-imposed desire to achieve. So I didn't have a lot of competition growing up. And so I always wanted to be the best athlete, the best academic. And so I played 4 different sports throughout the year, volleyball, basketball, track. Occasionally I would do cheerleading or softball, depending on which year it was. So I grew up as a multi-sport athlete, absolutely loved it. I accredit athletics to teaching me so many lessons in life and just helping shape the person that I am far beyond the court or the field or anything like that. And so it was something that I was super passionate about. The caveat to that is that no one growing up, like most of us, ever taught me how to fuel my body properly, taught me what health really looks like in a more holistic and wider encompassing range. So I went to college, played basketball for a few months, started to fall out of love with the sport, so made the very tough decision to pivot and do something different. And in that process, I discovered how really unhealthy I was physically, mentally, emotionally. I began drinking a lot of alcohol, as most college kids do. Yeah. I ate out all the time. I joke, like, being from Texas, Mexican food is its own food group. So the first diet I ever went on, I was like, I just won't eat dinner, but I'm going to still have my margarita and my chips and queso. Obviously, that makes a ton of sense. So you can see it was a very unhealthy lifestyle. It wasn't until my senior year of college that I realized how much that was catching up to me. I was tired all the time. It was hard to concentrate. I didn't have a lot of mental clarity. And I found myself at my heaviest weight that I'd ever weighed in my entire life. And that was a big eye-opening moment for me. I still didn't have very much education or knowledge on what to do with that. And shortly after graduating, my mom was diagnosed with stage 3 brain cancer. So I actually moved out here to Phoenix, Arizona to help take care of her. And it was in that process that I really reignited my love for fitness and my desire to start learning how to take care of myself at a deeper level, because at that point in life, I was showing up for her. I didn't have anybody there to take care of me. I had to be the one to take care of somebody. So it was very eye-opening. Unfortunately, she passed 9 months into her journey with cancer. And after that, I found myself very angry, very depressed, lacking a lot of direction. I had just graduated college the year before. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew something had to change. I remember sitting on my friend's bed in Texas. I was back visiting, and I just remember thinking, if this is how life is going to be, I don't really know that I want to be part of it. And that was a really big moment for me because I just knew something had to change. So I hired a trainer that was, again, going back to athletics, to fitness. That was what I knew my whole life. And I figured, why not start there? And it has propelled me into the journey that I'm in today. She convinced me to do bodybuilding, which I was terrified of, thought it was a terrible idea. But it really gave me a direction, a goal, and something to work toward, and gave me a lot of purpose at that point in my life. And it helped me open up my eyes to what has now been the biggest rabbit hole of my life. And that is functional health, fitness, mindset, and just helping women become their healthiest version of themselves and live an empowered life.
Yeah.
That was a long version.
It's all good. We'll circle back and unpack. What did that, like, growing up, the influence? So something that kind of popped into my mind while you were walking through that is, do you feel that the overachiever, while your parents weren't putting pressure on you, do you feel that maybe having, because you said the closest sibling to you is 12 years. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that impacted you to a degree as far as like overachieving? Because like you said, you kind of grew up like an only child, but at the same time, you did still have siblings. Yes. Right. And at that point, like, I feel like it's hard not to notice, like, hey, they're achieving X, Y, Z. They went to college, they did this. So it's like, well, my parents like love them and they've been around for a long time. And like, do you feel like that played a role?
I'm sure. Yeah, I think absolutely. My sister, the one that is the middle sister, so she's the one who's just 12 years older than me, very successful, extremely intelligent. She always wanted to be a doctor, and now she's a doctor who owns her own practice. She's amazing at what she does. And I did grow up, seeing her get good grades, seeing her go to college, seeing her go to medical school. And I think that because she was very much a role model for me, and she was somebody I was very close to despite the age gap and the fact that we lived in different states, I always felt and still do feel so close to her. So I do think there was an element of wanting to mimic that. And at the same time, my mom was also very successful in her career. She was, for most of my life, the breadwinner in the family. So looking up to women and having those role models, even though they're not consciously, placing those expectations on you, I think we all want to be like the people that we admire. And then I'm sure, if you asked my therapist, there's probably an element of feeling as though achieving is a way to also gain approval and gain love from those that are closest to us, right? And so I think I did learn early on, being a hard worker and having some natural talent at things I do believe. I think I started getting reinforcement from a young age that I was good at things, and that felt good. And so it's easy to really go down that, and just be like, okay, this is who I am. This is my identity. I'm good at this, and just really run with that. And it's helpful, but in my adult life, I've learned how to unpack a lot of that and try to step away from some of that overachieving.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that like comes to mind when you walked through that, especially like knowing, okay, sister, mom, being the breadwinner, like something that we deal a lot with is a lot of times our parents have the best intentions, like, especially with like nutrition, right? Like I grew up, I wound up 400 pounds at 19 years old. My parents told me to eat my protein and my veggies and eat fruit and eat well-balanced meals growing up, right? But the example that they led by. And so I think that you can kind of see the other side of the fence as far as what I walked through growing up versus like what you walked through growing up is like this they didn't necessarily put that pressure on you, but just simply the way that they lived.
Sure.
You mimicked what they're doing.
100%.
Right?
Yeah. And I feel like energetically too, as kids, especially, you pick up on a lot of that. So I think most of us might hear one thing, but if we see another, we're going to, like, to your point, we're going to do what we see.
Yeah. Because like you even said it earlier is, well, what happens if I get a B?
Yeah.
And your mom's like, well, if that's your best, it's your best. And in your head, immediately like, wow, that's not my best.
Right.
Like, I need an A.
Exactly.
Where does that come from? Right. It didn't, your mom never told you that. She told you almost the opposite of like, hey, if B's your best, cool, great, awesome. We're happy. We love you. But her actions showed otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
A's.
Yep. All A's.
Leading up into college, basketball, kind of getting burnt out on the sport, right? Like it starts to, I think a lot of athletes go through this. There comes a day where it stops being fun.
Yeah.
It starts becoming a job.
Yeah.
And I think something that I think that you can relate to is coaches go through this conundrum is we fall in love with the gym. We fall in love with weightlifting. We fall in love with the ability to work through hard things in our life and utilize training and exerting our body as an outlet. But there comes a point in your career where one day you wake up and guess what? That hobby that you once had is no longer your hobby. It's your career and it's an obligation. And there was definitely a long period of my life that I walked through that journey of like, I still showed up. I still did my workouts. I still did what I needed to do. And I've done it for 15 years. But there was a point where I really hated it for a long time. Didn't enjoy it anymore. Didn't want to go to the gym, but it's like, hey, this is your career. You don't have a choice. You have to show up.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. Like as far as like the basketball, like what was kind of going on? And do you love basketball now?
Oh, I love ball is life. I do
Ball
love basketball. I love sports. I mean, I love the sports that I played. I absolutely love. And now the older I get, the more I just have an appreciation for athletes. It could be synchronized swimming and might not do it, but I'm fascinated by it. And the work that athletes put in to master their craft, I think is beautiful. So yes, I do love basketball. Going to college, it was interesting. So I actually had a traumatic death that I experienced my senior year of high school. And I think that part of what I was going through with that, I think I lost a little bit of my pizzazz for things, if you know what I mean. Yeah. But it became an obligation, and it was, I've always been the person, to the point earlier, I've always wanted to win. I've always wanted to be the best, and I've wanted to have fun in the process. And I just started to not have fun anymore. And the people I was surrounding myself with, whether it was my teammates or the coaches, the staff, I just didn't feel like, I don't know, it just didn't feel like a passion anymore. I started to feel like that fire that I had for it was fizzling out. And it was something that I was so in love with as an athlete that I decided I would rather not continue to pursue this if I'm going to lose my love for it and end up hating it later. Now, when it's your career, that's a little bit different. But yeah, that was the first time I ever quit something. And it was one of the biggest ego checks that I had to do. The first time I ever had to check my ego really in my entire life, because I had so many narratives around being a quitter and, you are better than that, and, stick it out, continue to work hard, push, right? Like we see so many of our clients, especially women, just keep pushing, push harder, get over it. And I just said, you know what? No. And, I wasn't a D1 athlete. Admittedly, I wasn't on a full ride scholarship. So perhaps I would have felt differently, but I went to play because I loved it. And the minute that I felt like I wasn't loving it anymore, I just decided it's time for the next thing. It's time for a new period of growth. But I've had similar experiences in my career in health and fitness where, and admittedly, I probably haven't been as good as you have at forcing myself to get to the gym, but it's when something becomes an obligation, I think it's really important to be intentional about making it fun again. Because anytime I'm having fun in the gym or I'm having fun playing a sport, doesn't matter if I'm making money from it or not, I'm enjoying it. It's I think when it stops being fun or we stop making it fun, that it loses that spark.
To be fair, there's some ulterior motives. If you've listened to this show for any length of time, you know that I was once 400 pounds. Mm-hmm. And I also dealt with like undiagnosed hypothyroidism for 8 years.
Right.
And so I think for me, the grit to suffer through those workouts, to show up, was honestly a lot of times like, yes, it was, hey, this is your career. You don't really get a choice. But it was also, I don't ever want to go back.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good place to go.
For sure. No, I love that. I appreciate you bringing that up because I did not have that same experience from a health perspective, but I oftentimes find myself when I get out of that balance or I'm not maybe honoring those commitments to myself in the way that I used to or would like to, I strive to get back to that place, not because, you know, I enjoy the suffering, but because I see every aspect of my life become better when I'm doing those things consistently, even when I don't want to. Mm-hmm. I think we all agree on that. And so when I feel things getting out of balance, that's one of the first areas I assess is, am I showing up consistently? Am I keeping those commitments to myself? If not, then like that has to be the first thing we get back to.
Yeah. I mean, that's coaching women, especially, like this is super important. And this is a book that I've recently been reading, and the first section of the book that I read, like, is the difference between like who we say we are and our actions. And like, that's where like depression and anxiety or self-doubt or all of those things lie, right? Is in between there.
Right. And
the closer we can close that gap, the less and less we feel those things. Right. And honestly, the more, when I feel like to elaborate even on that, and I think to what your point is, you're saying is like, the closer we can close that gap, the more we are going to feel in alignment with ourselves.
Yeah.
And while we may be going through a season where, hey, like working out may not be enjoyable, it doesn't mean that it's not in alignment with who we want to be and who we want to show up as.
Right.
And that looks different for everyone. That may be 2 to 3 strength training sessions per week. That may be 4 to 6 training sessions. There's going to be variability between each individual, but there needs to be a baseline of that self-care.
Right.
Like, that's truly self-care.
Absolutely. Right. And I think one thing that I've seen in the past with women that I always try to encourage them to do is, if you get to that point in your fitness journey where you are just like not enjoying it anymore, like unless you're training for something specific, it's okay to try something different at, like, to your point, 2 or 3 resistance training or strength training sessions per week. Maybe go try a Pilates class or a yoga class. Like, I think so many people say, okay, I don't enjoy this anymore, I'm going to quit. And they just stop. And then there's no consistency. There's, like, to your point about alignment, that congruence with self starts to dissipate, and people find themselves right back where they were when they started because they're not keeping some sort of consistency, even if that consistency looks different. I think a lot of people overlook the fact that just because your workouts looked this way for this season and that served you, maybe it doesn't have to look that way in the next season, or maybe you shift temporarily and then I've done that so many times. I love a good bodybuilding workout, truthfully, but I love training like an athlete. I love like zenning out like
jumping.
A monk. Yes, I love to jump. I was a high jumper, so that's my claim to fame like back in my little hometown.
Like, sporadic, like Allie likes to jump real high.
It's so weird. It's like I'd get on that box and just like people are like, 3 sets of 5. I'm like, let's make it 15. I love jumping so much. much. 5 is too little. But yeah, do different things, explore, get creative, have fun. Again, when it's fun, you're going to continue to do it. And sometimes it's not going to be fun, and that's okay. But I think people just quit, and I don't like to see that. I know that that's not what serves people in the highest capacity.
I feel like when people quit, when people go to that extreme, is especially something like weight training. Mm-hmm. If you go full send and you just quit, is when you completely self-abandon.
For sure.
And you go complete full send the other way, because you start to not know how to fill your time. Mm-hmm. And you start to fill your time, and especially for women, specifically moms, you will completely self-abandon and fill all of your time with meeting everybody else's needs other than yours.
100%.
And you will walk around with it like a badge of honor, even though you're dying inside. Because you're doing nothing to serve yourself.
Right.
And realistically, it's one of the most selfish things that you can do. And, the irony is not lost on me, as I'm a 34-year-old single man with no children. But I have also coached women for a decade.
Right.
I have been actively involved in hundreds of women's lives for over a decade. Mm-hmm. And so while I can sit here and say, hey, I'm 34 and a single man, and that irony is not lost on me, I've also been very active in a lot of people's lives in helping women manage and navigate those things and how to show up for themselves. Right. And over and over and over again, and I think you can really relate with this, is that that is the best version of them. A balanced approach to it, because I've said this before. I had a conversation with, I did one-to-one mentorship with my coach for almost 2 years. Mm-hmm. And there was a conversation somewhere, I'll never forget this conversation, is realistically, an ideal training schedule for a woman would be 2 strength training workouts per week, 2 Pilates or yoga or some sort of mixture of that, and then 2 restorative hikes per week. That would be the pinnacle of an ideal woman's physiology. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that whatever you want to do is wrong,
right?
But in a picture perfect world, most women would thrive off of that, from a recovery and just that perspective.
Yeah.
What's been your experience in that? Navigate it, because you've been an athlete. Mm-hmm. You've trained strength and conditioning hard. You've jumped. You've done your yoga and this, that, and the other thing. Does that align? Do you feel some similarities there?
For sure. I have it. I love that split. I might go home and try that. So I'm
she's sold.
Yeah, sign me up. But no, it's interesting you say that, because back when I was an athlete, yes, I was going to school, but we would wake up. I remember my senior year, I ran cross country just to get in shape. I was not a long distance runner. I don't enjoy long distance running. If you ask me to run miles with you, I'll tell you that I'll meet you at the end with a car so we can drive to get some food. Yes. But I would run cross country in the morning. We would do strength and conditioning during our athletic period, and then we would train whatever sport it was season for after school. So we were training 3 times a day. And I remember at certain points feeling under recovered. You're at school all day. It's but again, that was my responsibility. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a business. I didn't have these things that I had to be accountable for. Even when I was in bodybuilding, I was in my early to mid 20s. I did work full time. I worked remotely, though. Again, at that point in time, and still, I don't have kids.
Yeah.
Wasn't, again, trying to run and grow a business. I know working is hard. My personal experience has been, my time as an employee was a lot more chill than my time as a business owner. So I had the capacity to train at a harder and heavier level because I had a lot more time and capacity to recover.
Yeah.
Those were my responsibilities in life. Now, being a business owner, having, different clients and working with different people and having other obligations and other responsibilities in life, I can't imagine even attempting to train that way at this point. I feel like my adrenals would be on one. My sleep would be awful. I might feel good for a week, and then I feel like it would just be a heavy decline personally. And so I do in my personal experience and experience with clients, especially when we're talking about women as we're aging, as we're going through different seasons of life, where again, we have more responsibilities, we have more obligations, we have less capacity. I think that a training smarter and not just harder or training more approach, and really working with a woman's physiology. And again, that physiology is going to look different at 22 than it is at 35, 40, 45, 50. And I think a lot of people just aren't educated on that, but lose sight of that. So to your point, in my experience, I have not had a strictly regimented routine like that where I was only strength training twice a week and then doing these other modalities. But I've started to incorporate so many more recovery modalities, doing less intense training when I do train. I train with purpose, of course, when I go into the gym, but I don't train to beat myself to shreds or to burn X amount of calories. We know that those aren't accurate anyway, but I go with purpose, but I don't go to try to, set a PR unless I'm, if I was in a strength phase and that was the goal, but that's not been my goal. So I've had great experience from myself. Like I'm actually my leanest that I have personally been in since I was like in show prep. And I'm not encouraging people to not work out. I am still working out, but my approach has become so much more recovery focused. I still train with purpose. I still am very active, but I have started focusing more on how can I recover better? How can I sleep better? How can I lower my stress levels? Or how can I prep my body or give my body what it needs to adapt to the stress that I don't really have as much control over? And how can I continue to keep my inflammation low? And it's been magical.
Yeah.
And I train probably a fraction of what I did when I was a competitor.
Yeah. Because you've already brought it up, is you're not 22 anymore.
Right.
You're starting to step into, like women's biological clock is a lot different than men's, right? Like you go through multiple phases throughout life.
Right.
And, something that we have a deeper understanding of is like functional med practitioners is like the choices that you make today are going to impact you in 5 years. They're going to impact you in 10, and they're really going to impact you in 20 years when you get to that point where you should be entering menopause, right, provided that all the decisions that you make today in the coming 5 years are in alignment and you're able to age appropriately and progress into menopause at 50. Because so much of what we're seeing in the functional med space is like, I've seen women go perimenopause at 27.
Oh yeah. I had a client at
5 years younger than you.
Yeah. It's wild.
Like we're seeing that because I'll let you unpack that one. Is like, what is that like from your experience and what you've seen? Why?
That's a great question. In my experience with my clients that have had challenges such as that or similar to that, I feel like I have seen it boil down to three main things, and that is chronic stress, under eating, undernourishment, just under recovery in general, right? Like when we think about the body, it takes resources to run. It takes resources to function. It takes resources to have a healthy functioning metabolism. So when people are like, oh, my metabolism just not what it used to be, I'm like, maybe we're just not giving your body the right inputs, because everything we expect, we live in a world that expects outputs, right? Whether it's physical, mental, anything like that. And
emotional.
Correct. Yeah. And we don't give ourselves or each other the proper input. So how are we going to expect an output without giving ourselves the input? So I see it being chronic stress, undernourishment, just under recovery in general, and then high toxic load. We live in a society where we're bombarded with toxins every day. And I'm not like being like, oh, it is what it is, right? And so we either have to learn how to mitigate that and support our body in the natural process of getting rid of some of these compounds that speed up aging, that create systemic inflammation, that essentially wreak havoc, that compounded, in my opinion, with the other things, make things like adequate hormone production just that much more challenging for the body to actually do. And so I see those as being the three common things. And I'm sure we could go into a rabbit hole, but yeah. And I see that, again, I work primarily with women as well, but I see it so prevalently with women, especially when we, enter the conversation about women taking care of everybody else but themselves. Yeah. Then it's like compounded fivefold.
What does that like let's talk stress first.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do want to get, cause I'll be curious your inputs on the like endocrine disruptors. Cause I feel like given your kind of like hippie nature, like you might be a little bit more in tune with that than even I am. Like I'm aware of it, but maybe haven't gone down the rabbit hole as much. What does that look like from a stress endpoint? Like the way it was explained to me at one point is like you have a 5-gallon bucket. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's your stress.
Yeah. An empty bucket or a full bucket?
Well, like it starts it as an empty
bucket.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and
yeah.
That's like, we can kind of like give an image of like, okay, you have this 22-year-old.
Right.
Schoolwork, working out, social life. Like that's it.
Yes.
Maybe some financial stress. Like, and that's like what their stress bucket looks like. And then there's this massive, like half the bucket's empty, right? Like that can be filled with whatever kind of stress that you want to induce on the body that week.
Yes. No, I love that visual. I used to listen to his podcast like back in 2017, and he's the reason I really started getting or developing a passion for this side of the industry. But he used to refer to it as a rain barrel. So similarly, a bucket, right? There's some sort of container, and it starts out empty. And I look at that both from a stress perspective and also a toxin perspective too, right? It's same thing. So eventually over time, that bucket becomes full, it starts overflowing, and then that's where we start to see issues manifest in the body. And I see this a lot with individuals who are like, oh, I used to be able to eat whatever I want, and now I can't even eat this thing without feeling like I gain weight. It's like, maybe you could eat that, but that doesn't mean it wasn't compounding, right? It doesn't mean we weren't filling that bucket. Or I used to, I'm that person. I remember in college, I was taking 18 hours of classes one semester. I was working part-time remotely, and I was babysitting, like doing a babysitting gig on the side. And I remember I wore that like a badge of honor. I was like just constantly like like running around like a crackhead. I was not on crack for anybody that's listening to this, but I was caffeinated enough that I was running around like one. And I remember driving in my car down the highway one day, coming home from my babysitting gig, and I was like, have I even breathed today? Like I was just like holding my breath the whole time. And, I was 20, however old I was, not saying that was good for me then, but I could tolerate that. And you do that for long enough, and all of a sudden, again, like to your point, that bucket is full. And now we start seeing the body breakdown. We start seeing your mental health breakdown, your emotional health. It's just a cascade. So one stressful event in isolation is not going to create those issues. Like physiologically, we are made for those acute bouts of stressors or acute exposure to something. But when that's our normal now and it's compounded over time, I tell clients this all the time, you like your money, you put it in an account, you get compound interest, you start to see it grow exponentially. The same thing happens negatively when we start living in a place where these things are compounding over time. 1 time's not going to hurt you, 2 times probably won't hurt you, 3 might not either, but 10, 20, 100, and it just starts building and building and building.
Yeah, like brief even sprints, right? Like a month, 2 months, as long as like the next 10 months are a little bit more lower key. Like I relate with what you're saying so much. I didn't go the college route. I did for a year. But
you didn't miss much.
I know I didn't. I'm so grateful that I didn't spend that money. I remember, I was 23. Well, realistically, it started when I was 21. 21, I had been working a quote unquote career job, right? Like had a job at a bank and I was a career man.
Look at you.
Look at me. Sophisticated. And like it was barely enough to pay my bills. And I was working 80 hours every 2 weeks. Like required, right? Yeah. Like that was the interesting part about that whole job that was so interesting about like corporate Americas is like there was no like, it was a requirement. Like we cut you a check for 86.67 hours twice a month. You were required to work these hours. If you don't take them off for vacation, yada, yada. And I started in bartending, and that was like the stint that started. I was working. We had to work every other weekend. We would get one day off during the week. so you'd have every other weekend off. And I remember the bar that I was working at, I would work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday nights. And so the way my training schedule or the way my work schedule ended up, I was like averaging 70 to 80 hours a week. There was like almost a 2-year stint where I would work with one Sunday off. And I loved it. Like I just, it's insane. I loved it.
Yeah.
Like I, again, wore that as a badge of honor. And by the time I turned 25, I had a traumatic event happen. And that was like, the best way I can explain it is I had built a massive bonfire, and the one traumatic event in my life that happened, it was like someone lit a match and just said,
yep.
Low testosterone, hypothyroidism, like you name it, like my life was just set on fire.
I am actually really glad you brought that up, because that's something that I see a lot with clients too, is this compounding effect. And then there's that one traumatic event or that one extreme life stressor that just seems to set off the cascade that's already been building and building and building.
Mm-hmm. And that can look different for anyone.
Sure.
That can be, you're a career woman working 60 hours a week, and you're following the training program that worked for you at 25,
right,
but you're now 32. You work 60 hours a week. You're now a wife. You have 1 or 2 children. All of a sudden, you're starting to build this fire.
Mm-hmm.
And we see it, unfortunately, divorce, loss of a parent, child illness.
Yep.
It lights that fire.
For sure.
And without working in the space that we work in, you don't recognize it. You don't recognize what you're doing. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're just like, your whole world's on fire and your health is on fire.
Right.
And you don't know what went wrong.
I hear that from women all the time. One of the most common things they say to me when I first talk to them, or I see in their intake form, and it's, how did I get this way? Or how did I let myself get to this point? Because it is so much of it's, we just aren't aware of it, and it compounds. And then, like you, to your point, I see this a lot in my area living in Florida, natural disasters, how that can rock someone's world. And that I've seen that with clients, that be the trigger that starts to cascade or light that fire on fire. Yeah. Did
you have any like negative impacts of like nutrition early on? Like as far as like anything, like you said in high school, like training 3 times per week, right? Or 3 times a day, 3 a days. Did you ever pay for those? Like, did you ever have any repercussions come up outside of just from general fatigue? Any torn ligaments, injuries, etc.?
No. I think I was pretty fortunate in that regard. I will say, from a nutrition perspective, we were not the healthiest. My parents really tried to prioritize cooking, better dinners. And I was not afraid to eat, though. It's interesting when I look back, my dad was never a big eater. He was always a thin guy. Like, he was that kind of person that could eat 1 Oreo. And I'm like, who are you? You've 1 Oreo? Are you a serial killer? Like, who does that? But okay.
I want to be your dad.
I'm right. Me too.
1 Oreo?
I know. I'm like, I will eat 1 box of Oreos.
Sleeve.
Right. And my mom, she was somebody who, I remember her dieting for a lot of my life, but I never heard her talk super poorly about her body. It was just, she was kind of like watching what she ate. So I didn't have that kind of negative influence, thankfully. So I wasn't afraid to eat. I actually, in high school, a guy that was my friend, how boys like to make jokes, he started calling me Fat Al with a PH. Apparently that's the cooler way. Not because I was fat, but because I would eat a lot. And I'm like, yeah, I work out a lot and I'm hungry. So I was never afraid to honor my hunger. Now, I wasn't always eating the best of things. Lots of sodas. I had a Dr. Pepper every single day after school from the time I was 4 till the time I was 19. If that gives you any indication, those are good times. Lots of potato chips, pizza in the cafeteria. So I was not nourishing my body properly. Nobody taught me how to do that, but I was eating. And so I think that, I was fortunate in that regards. We trained. I had a good athletic department. As we trained a lot, but they were really good about doing like proper periodization, and we went through various phases.
So you got lucky. You got a good coach. You got a good coach in high school.
My high school coaches were better than my college coaches. They were phenomenal. I will say like that is one of the best things about my experience as an athlete. And then perhaps
it wasn't Joe who was giving you the same program he had in high school 20 years previously.
I mean, maybe he did have it. I don't know, but no. I mean, we had a great coaching staff. Because we were a smaller school and we had less talent pool to pull from, they wanted to try to make us the best athletes possible. And then focusing on sport was important, but it was kind of secondary. So, I mean, we were encouraged during the summers, they would do morning workouts and it was optional, but I mean, we were encouraged to go. So Monday through Thursday in the mornings, I mean, we would work on speed, we would work on agility, we'd work on strength training. We worked out with the football team, the athletic director. So we were really encouraged to just become very well-rounded athletes from a physical perspective. And then, if you were good at your sport, you were good at your sport. But yeah, I was lucky in that regard. And perhaps I do believe, I know genetics only play a very, very, very small percentage. I do think I have had better genetics for some of those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a pretty good experience with that. It wasn't until I started drinking margaritas every day that I was like, maybe this is having a negative effect.
Maybe.
Living in Texas, we love our Mexican food and margaritas.
Bodybuilding. Like, let's fast forward.
Yeah.
Let's start out actually, like, what was the good of like for you?
Yeah.
Like in bodybuilding.
For sure. So the period of time in which I started to bodybuild was about 5 months after my mom passed away. And it gave me a channel to channel my grief, my anger. Like I would go to the gym and it was meditative for me.
Yeah.
I like to work, like I'll work out with friends, but I've never been that person that's like, I have a workout buddy and I go to the gym with them. Like I go to the gym and I put my headphones in and I want to be in my own world. It gave me at the time, healthy outlet. I do think there's a spectrum like everything, but at the time it was a healthy outlet for me to channel that frustration, that grief, that anger in a positive way and not turn to substances like alcohol or drugs or anything else that, people might turn to when they're going through something really life altering.
I'm going to pause you right there. Let's unpack that a little bit. Is like for you, you felt like healthy outlet. Like,
yes, at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
But we've both seen the opposite.
Oh, yeah.
What can that look like?
Yeah.
When we're talking about a competitor.
Right.
What can that, like, how can that healthy outlet quickly turn to a negative?
Oh, yeah. So that actually kind of happened to me. And so part of that, in my personal opinion and experience, it was a really good outlet for channeling my emotions, but I still wasn't actually dealing with the grief, the sadness, right? Like I would feel this energy build up inside of me and I would, want to break something, or I would just want to get it out. And so it was like, cool, I'm going to go lift some weights. I'm going to get it out. Still not actually dealing with it. So for me, the outlet almost became an escapism at a certain point where I was using that. And again, being a high achiever, I was at a point in life where I was trying to define who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do with my life in a sense of career and purpose. And so that was all I had at that point. And so I was like, I'm just going to put everything into this. And it quickly became a way of just achieving more, perhaps even validating myself, escaping the negative and uncomfortable thoughts and emotions and things that were coming up. And then I had my first competition. I did really well. I was super proud of myself because it was going back to that mindset that has an athlete of showing up for yourself, putting in the hard work, having the discipline, the motivation, the grit, especially when you don't want to. And I was like, all right, let's keep going. And it's interesting because I never sat there and was like, I want to compete at the Olympia, but I just was like, this is my thing and I'm doing it. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it 110%. And I started just becoming so hyper-focused on food, as you have to be in bodybuilding. However, it started to get to the point where I was like, oh, I'm not lean enough to do a photo shoot. I look back at check-in photos from the time period where I was thinking that, and I'm so lean that I think I actually look like emaciated, because it's not what I see now. And so I think that, especially with bodybuilding, I have clients that come to me and they're like, I want to compete in a show. And my first question is, amazing. Why do you want to compete in a show? Why? And so I think for healthy reasons, or, for healthy levels of motivation, like that can be a feasible goal if you approach it in the healthiest way possible, even though we know that extreme is not healthy. But I think for a lot of people, it's a way to escape. It's a way to get validation. It's a way to feel confident about yourself for a very short, temporary, fleeting moment. And anybody who's been a competitor or who's talked to a competitor, that the minute you step off that stage and you're not in stage like shape anymore, you're not stage lean, that is almost a harder place to be mentally than any of the work that you put in up to that point. And I think people talk about it more now. When I competed, I don't think people talked about that enough. How much of are we allowed to cuss on this show?
Yeah.
How much of a mind fuck it is coming out of a show prep. And just when you're pouring that kind of work and effort, and then you have this idea of, I think this is what happens to a lot of women. They think that's how I should look. Just because you looked that way for a day or a week or, whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that you should look that way all the time. Because again, we know that extreme is not healthy. And so I think that it can very quickly go from being healthy to just becoming obsessive. That was a lot.
So I don't know if you know this, but I'm going to compete in a year.
No. Okay, I want to compete with you because I've been thinking about stepping back on stage.
So I'm going to compete in a year.
Awesome.
And for me, this is 16 years in the making. This is 400 pounds to stage lean, sub 100. Like, coach wants me to compete in light heavies, which is 198.
Nice.
And we're not done bulking until March. So it's very possible that this may be 50 to 60 pounds peeled off of me to be stage ready. Right. I think something that where this kind of came from is I did 75 hard at the beginning of this year, and I walked into 75 hard, and some may be unaware, look it up. It's not hard to find like what it is. But I think a lot of people approach 75 hard wrong. I did not go into 75 hard for the diet, like at all. Like that was for me, it was 100% the mental grit.
For sure.
And I think outside of just being competitive as a bodybuilder, I really think that a lot more people would get a lot more out of competing as a bodybuilder and being that athlete if they approach it with the same mindset of 75 hard. And what I mean by that is understanding that this is a choice, and it is to test your mental fortitude, to build resilience, to build discipline, and in turn, discipline builds freedom.
Right.
And I think a lot of people would have a lot better outcomes on the other side of stage if they looked at it as this is a way of life. This is a framework. This is a discipline that we can utilize in all avenues of life. Something that was recently brought to my attention, and I really had an appreciation for this. And some of you out there that maybe are diehard 75 hard people, you're going to laugh at this and you're going to be like, oh, that's stupid. But the person that I was specifically talking to is a ruthless CEO and very successful. When I was telling them about my experience doing 75 hard, they were like, ooh, like I'm going to build my own 75 hard. And what they meant by that when they explained it to me is they were like, okay, here's the concept of 75 hard is I need to do these things to better myself, and I'm going to do them daily. What are those 4 to 6 action steps that I can take daily that are going to improve the quality of my life, either in business or maybe for them specifically, that is going to improve their personal life, right? Because they have a tendency to over-index in work and professional. And I think that's a really valuable tool that maybe we can take the guys of 75 hard or take the guys of bodybuilding away. And how can we apply that? What are 4 to 6 action steps I can take daily that serves me, my highest self thoughts? Like, what do you like? I feel like you're going to align with what I'm saying.
No,
like,
what
is it?
I love that.
Yeah.
I also did 75 hard a couple of years ago, and the same thing. It was never about I want to lose weight or I'm on a diet. It was the same thing. It was going back to that exact same thing that I got out of being an athlete or that I got out of bodybuilding. Once I was able to remove myself from the aesthetic aspect of it, it's that discipline, that grit, and it feels so good. That's where confidence, in my opinion, is built. It's not, if people say, oh, I want to lose 20 pounds because I'll feel more confident. You might feel confident temporarily from the weight loss, but you're going to feel confident because you did the things that you needed to do to get to that point.
To yourself.
Exactly. And so for me, that was always the takeaway. And I do think that, again, whether it's full on 75 hard or whether it's choosing 4 to 6 things, or if you're, a mom and you have
maybe it's 1 to 3.
Right. Doing something. I mean, I know there's been points in my life where doing one thing consistently every day has felt freaking good when everything else feels like it's like flying all over the place. Yeah. And so, to the point, the people who are diehard 75 harders probably not going to resonate with that. But, again, the mindset and the principle behind that whole challenge is amazing. And I think that people can adapt it and apply it to their lives. It's not going to make you worse. I'll tell you that, even doing a modified version or like the gentleman that you were talking to, doing something like that is only going to enhance every other aspect of your life. And one of the things that I talk about with clients a lot that's been really helpful for me when I look back at my bodybuilding journey is reminding individuals that it's not like the gold is not what you get at the end, right? It's not being stage lean. It's not stepping on. It's who you become in the process. And so what are those action items? What are those promises that you're keeping to yourself? Who is that making of you? Because the financial goal, the stepping on stage, like those are such temporary short-term blips in this overall timeline of life. And we enjoy them and we celebrate them when they happen. And the next day it's, what's next, right? So when I say what's next, I want to know that I've become a better person in the process. And I think, especially from a bodybuilding perspective, if people approached it more like that, I think we would be able to detach from the unhealthy side.
Yeah. I think we'd see a healthier community overall.
Totally. Yeah.
In that space. There's a recent clip from Andy Frisella's podcast, right? The creator of 75 Hard. He talks about, and I just listened to the episode. Someone asked, they're like, I don't really, I'm on day 48 of 75 Hard and I really don't get that. And he's like, I don't get how. He's like, I'm not wired like that. He's like, and I align with this is like, I started 75 Hard while I was back home in Minnesota, January 1st. The first 27 days of my 75 Hard was spent in Fargo, North Dakota.
Oof. Tell me about that outdoor workout.
27 outdoor workouts. Actually, realistically, because the way I approached it was I was doing 4 strength training sessions. And on my other days, typically I would do 2 outdoor workouts. So whatever that is, I don't even know, upwards of probably 35 outdoor workouts in a span of 27 days, give or take. And there was a good chunk that it was -10. Wow. I have multiple pictures of my beard being frozen, icicles.
Nice.
And there's something to be said about, there's Fargo's a decent sized city. There's 300,000 people and there was numerous workouts at night. And even one, I went to visit a friend in a nearby town. It's you want to talk about one stoplight. This is a 1 stoplight, 200 person town, 20 minutes outside of where I grew up. I had to do an outdoor workout and I was walking a county highway, frozen.
That's awesome though. Cause that is such an ingrainment in your neurology of there's no such thing as excuses. If you can do that,
you can do anything.
Right.
It gives you a different perspective. And I think that it's to that point, it's we can take those, we can now remove like the cap of 75 hard, and it's like, okay, 2 workouts, one has to be outdoor no matter the conditions, is like, okay, how can I apply this in maybe create maybe my own 90-day period, 75-day period, where it's like, what are these 4 to 6 things going to serve me and move my life in alignment with who I am, but are going to make me uncomfortable? Right. That there's going to be days, multiple days, if not all the days, that there's going to be some aspect of this thing that I'm choosing to do that I don't want to do. Because for a lot of us, like for me personally, my 45-minute outdoor walk, that's a non-negotiable. That's still in my life, like is a daily practice for me, no matter what. And even if there's like, there will be periods, right? Like not quote unquote on program, I'll slip up and I might fall off for 10 days, but it's such an ingrained habit that it's so easy to just pick back up as if nothing happened. And I go back on my way and I do it. Right. So it's like, would 75 hard do me the same benefits again if I did it, or looking at it, removing the cap in the guise of 75 hard because I've created such a ingrained lifestyle of like 45-minute workout or walk daily. What could I replace with that then ingrains a behavior and moves forward? Yeah. And I think that's where like true growth lies. And I think that's something that we as coaches focus on, is like, rather than 12-week transformations, we talked about this before the podcast, year transformations. So it's like, what are those habits that we can build? And then what are the habits that we can grow on top of? Right. Negatives of bodybuilding for you? I definitely developed some disordered eating patterns, not eating disorders, but my life revolved around food. And I know that that's the case for a lot of competitors, right? It's like, when's my next meal? What's my next meal? Now I have like hypoglycemic tendencies because I have like really low calories and I'm still training pretty hard, and I'm going to eat a small child. Everything just becomes so centered around that. For me also, developing some level, even a minor level of body dysmorphia. Like I can tell you, when I look back at my check-in photos prior to my second show, that is not, and maybe that's what I saw in the mirror, but that's not who I identified with at the time. And so I think that my clients call it the inner gym when we work on mindset, beliefs, emotional health, mental health. And I wasn't doing those things in the process. And so I think that my physical reality was changing and my internal reality was not, and it didn't match. And I became hard on myself for sure. And so I think, again, and if we want to talk about physiological, I was very fortunate to have a coach who, her husband was a functional medicine doctor. So I was very fortunate. My hormones were not wrecked. I never lost my cycle, believe it or not. I had a really positive experience with reverse dieting, but I followed her plan. I took it seriously even after the show. And so I was fortunate in that regard, but I see a lot of competitors. I mean, I remember getting off stage and the girls backstage with me were like, just like ravenous, grabbing all their snacks, like finally they can eat. And I was like, yeah, snack sounds great, but like I wasn't dying. And so I just physiologically, we see the hormone adaptation, we see metabolic adaptation, we just see everything start to downregulate because again, we're training at such a high level, that the amount of stress that places on the mind and the body on top of the life stress that we're all already subjected to on a day-to-day basis, restricted food intake. And, most people who compete in bodybuilding they're not like willy-nilly like, oh yeah, I guess I'll work out today. And it's like, when you really get into it, you're into it. And so, again, negative consequences, both from a physical perspective, a mental perspective. And I think to your point, why is someone wanting to approach bodybuilding in the first place? And if it's because they think getting in that shape is going to make them feel better about themselves or make them more worthy or more lovable, or it's an outlet for them that is really just a way of escaping the things that a lot of us don't want to face in our day-to-day life. That's where I see a lot of the negative consequences, or believe that some of the negative consequences start to set in. Well, yeah, because you can then quickly lose sight of really anything that's important in life. It can become very self-isolating. Right.
That's probably why I liked it. I like to isolate every now and then. I'm like, give me some stuff to chew on later.
Create negative relationships with food, negative relationships with exercise, to extremes of like, I have to do this. Anybody who stands in my way is standing in the way of my goals. No flexibility. Right. Very, very rigid, very selfish.
For sure.
And yeah, that can be very like, if you're not approaching it with the right mindset, it can get really bad really fast.
Totally. And I think people start to create those negative associations in their mind when they think about weight training, or they even, eating a certain way. I don't eat like I'm in prep, but I still enjoy most of the same foods. I really love nutrient dense, high quality foods. And I think for a lot of people though, when they are so hard on, a strict regimen with their diet, with their exercise, when they're not on that anymore, like they go full send the other direction. Yep. Because in their mind, there's a negative association between those things and how they felt, because most people going through prep don't feel amazing most of the time. And so, yeah, I think to your point, just the relationship that it creates with those things and with ourselves and our life in general can become negative if you're not aware of it. And if you're not, practicing other things to help with that.
Yeah. It's really cool to hear that you had that coach, like as far as like, because we were talking about this before the show, is I've coached a competitor, and like to me it's like and this sounds like a very similar approach that you experience, is like there's a time to be as healthy as possible, have as much nutrients as possible, train as hard as you can, keeping physique in check.
Right.
And then there's like a mentor coined this term as like the prepping to prep phase, right? Like we're pulling off the weight, we're finding a low end of maintenance, like, but we're still keeping you healthy and we're getting you prep to prep.
Right. I love that.
And then it's time to drop the hammer, and it's time to push to, and the cool thing is this is a great point of like, the human body is anti-fragile. Like it is not as fragile as some people would have you in this industry believe.
Sure.
To sell you something. To sell you something. And it's extremely resilient. Like we can push those boundaries, but then like, it sounds like, so you kind of walked through that process, right? Healthy as we possibly can, prep to prep, pull off weight, pull off inflammation. And then it was time to drop the hammer and get to the suck. And then you walked out of your show and you weren't ravenous. You weren't, like you enjoyed some of the things.
Right.
But you weren't so bad and in such a bad mental place that it was like, oh my God, this is my reward.
No.
And balloon up 30 pounds.
No, I did not have that experience, thankfully. But I see it happen a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, to your point, and I think that's why, whether you're a bodybuilder, whether you're somebody who is just looking for coaching on, general health and weight loss, let's say, like to have a coach who is knowledgeable about all the other aspects, right? Like, yes, training is crucial. Nutrition and macros, those are critical, especially when you're in a bodybuilding setting. And there are a lot of other things that are important to prioritize, and understanding, we talk about biofeedback all day, understanding when someone's biofeedback is truly trending in a direction that's like, okay, let's not continue down that route, because then to your point, the body's not fragile, but the body's going to adapt.
Yeah. So give some examples of biofeedback that you're going to like be aware of, like when it's time to pull back?
It's a hard question when you're talking about a competitor, because, you might be
we can talk about Gen Pop too.
Yeah. Cause with a competitor, for instance, I've, first and foremost, sleep. I've seen that when we're really in prep, and I'm talking 2 to 3 weeks out,
right?
Stress levels physiologically, regardless of the stress going on in someone's external life, like is heightened. So I typically see sleep patterns start to get a little wonky. Maybe they're not, quality of sleep isn't as great, or quantity of sleep is starting to diminish a little bit. Now with a competitor, that's it's expected.
Suck it up, buttercup. And
right. Yeah. From a general population standpoint, sleep, digestion, huge one. Actually, so it's interesting, in my second prep, again, I really love high quality foods. Like I have been gluten and dairy free for a long time by my own choice because I feel significantly better.
Sure.
I dabble with it here and there, but it's not a big staple in my life. And I love the way that I eat and I feel amazing with it. So I was never that person that was like, oh, I'm going to just crush a bunch of Pop-Tarts, let's say, for the sake of like meeting my macros. So at one point when I was in my building phase, I mean, I was pushing quite a bit of food to the point where I was starting to feel impacts to my digestive tract because I was like, how many more potatoes can I eat? It's probably not that much now. We're talking like 2,300 calories. So not that high, but for me at the time, because I was, coming out of prep, obviously reversing back up. But again, I'm sure there was a stress component as well that's going to alter digestion. So if I were to look at my stress levels at the time, I was a heavy caffeine abuser at that point in life. I would joke, like, if your heart's not palpitating, are you even having enough coffee? And now I'm like, that's the dumbest thing that I could have ever said. Why would I say that? Now that starts happening. And I'm like, whoa, we got to go take deep breaths. Like, let's bring this down. So digestion being a big one. Obviously, individuals who are on lower calories or individuals in prep, it's common to see somebody not have a bowel movement every day because food intake is so much less than it was beforehand. Again, going back to stress, and that's where I always, when I'm talking with clients, I like to clarify, is there something stressful that's happening in your life, or are you just internally feeling more stressed? So getting that like perception of what's going on both internally and in their external reality. Recovery, obviously, you asked me about that earlier. Recovery is usually going to decline when somebody is training harder, eating less, under recovering nutritionally. Somebody who's in a prep phase might experience that, or someone who just, again, is undernourished and has a lot of stress and burns through their resources quicker is going to feel. I mean, I just spent like a week with family and, like, not going to lie, I feel a little under recovered. I'm like, phew, it was a fun week, but it was like a little stressful in its own right. And I'm like, I would love to go be by myself and take a nap. You know what I mean? So it's like, and that's not even that stressful. So those are things that I would typically look at.
Yeah, because we can even say that about like Gen Pop, right? Like
for sure.
You're in a dieting phase. You've been dieting for a while. Maybe because everyone's physiology is different, right? So it's going to manifest differently. Maybe you're the person that starts to notice, hey, my sleep's suffering. That might be your first whisper, because the body whispers before it screams.
Oh, for sure. And it wants you to listen when it whispers, so it doesn't have to scream.
Maybe your sleep starts to go wonky. Or maybe you go brain dead. Like, in my experience of 75 hard leading into basically a full 90-day diet, I noticed for me, I could push my calories down to 2,300 calories.
Yeah. Oh.
And I'm a big boy.
A little bigger than me.
Just a little
Just a
bit.
tiny bit.
I could push myself down to 2,300 and I could function. I was fine. Minimal biofeedback problems. And at the time I was like, well, I'm not prepping for a show. I have work to do. I need to be able to function. So we brought food back up. It's a key point.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Like, these are things that we need to recognize and like be aware of, like when we're dieting is especially for like Gen Pop, like you're not dieting for a show, you're dieting to look good naked. Maybe we need to expand your time horizon.
100%. I even do that with my show competitors. Truthfully, I'm like, we could prep you in 4 months, 6 months, fine. Are you open to 9 months, maybe 12 months to just, have a better experience with the body? But to your point, I don't know if you've had this experience growing up as an athlete. Again, I, at various periods of my life, was able to recover better. I didn't have as many responsibilities or other things that I was accountable for. And so I found that I feel that I almost had, and I see this with my clients who've been athletes, assuming they don't push past that limit and are now going on the side to their detriment, but they seem to have a little bit more resiliency that I imagine is just compounded over time. Like, I see their bodies able to handle maybe dieting a little bit better than, let's say, someone who's Gen Pop that never really worked out before, has never really gone through an intentional dieting phase, or has never kind of pushed their body to a certain boundary. before.
100%. I think even Gen Pop can build this skill set, right? Maybe not skill set, maybe resilience
For sure.
that you're talking about. Is we can build that. And realistically, as I've actually spent more time working with men this past year in a different venture, is most men and women right now that are general population need to spend an entire year at maintenance calories, training really hard, 3 to 4 days a week, managing their stress and other things. Then they need to go into maybe 4 to 6 month dieting, depending on how your physiology is handling it. Reverse out, spend double that amount of time. So we're talking 8 to 12 months at maintenance. And then at that point, you can diet for probably 12 to 16 weeks and have what I call the forever body. Like your body is tip top. To what Allie just spoke about is like you have this resilience where you can manage dieting better. You've built such a solid foundation. And then once you have your forever body, again, you maintenance for, okay, I just said 12 to 16 weeks. You double that. Now you have this forever body that at any given point, you can diet for 4 to 6 weeks. You can show up nice and lean, ready for whatever you're doing, the Vegas trip to this, that, or the other. But on the other side of that token is you have so much food freedom. You have so much lifestyle freedom because of the discipline and the resilience that you've built through that time frame.
Yeah. I love that because you touched on the exact thing that we talked about earlier, and that's the timeline. Like in that exact process, we're looking 2.5 years minimum. Then you're set essentially, right? Now it's not to say, okay, go just like totally undo all of these habits that you built. But at that point, you have built these habits. They've become part of you. I've hit that point, and it's been such a blessing and freeing experience to be able to have that flexibility for those of you that don't know me, I traveled here in my camper van to see family for the holidays, and my workouts have been very inconsistent the last couple of weeks. Now I will be full back on my regimen when I get home, and I'm excited for it, but I've had the flexibility. I've not had a full kitchen. I've had to get creative with my nutrition, and I feel great. I haven't gained weight.
You don't feel fat.
No,
you don't feel ugly.
no.
You're not fitting in your clothes.
No, not at all. I feel the same. If anything, I might have lost a little bit of muscle mass in the process, which I don't love. But no, I mean, I feel great. My mental clarity is still great. My energy levels are great. I have not gained weight. I'm just the same. I'm me, right? And so it's like
you've probably trained like what 4 times in the last like month, maybe.
Off the top of my head 3, but let's go with 4. Okay, 4 sounds good.
You're going to train with me after
I'm going to train. Yes. Yes. That'll be 5.
Number 4.
Yeah. There we go. You're lucky number 4. Yeah. So it's been sparse, but to your point, I've been active. I've walked, I've hiked. I have focused on all of the other things that I know I can control, even if that one area isn't on point. But I've spent years not dieting. I spent years, being out of a bodybuilding state. Yeah. Really just focusing on my health, focusing on nourishing myself physically, mentally, and emotionally. And yeah, I mean, when you get to that point, to your point earlier, the discipline creates freedom. So if you can be disciplined and you can give yourself a long enough time span, you don't have to worry about that. Oh my God, yeah, my trip is in 4 weeks. There's no way I'll ever look the way I want. It's like, oh, let me just refine things a little bit for that month. And here we are. So
to wrap this up, the final question for everyone, and you can thank Sam for this.
Damn it.
It's not as bad as you might think it is. It's a good one. How are you living intentionally in this season of your life?
I love that. I'm going to thank Sam. How am I living intentionally at this season of my life? In this particular phase of my life, and this kind of spans across all areas of life, my business, my personal relationships, my relationship to self, and my health and fitness, I'm at the point where my intention is to become so congruent with myself and with what I want in life, and to live in that congruency and not, do things because I think that's what I should do or because it makes someone else happy when really it doesn't make me happy. And Yeah, so that's where my intention has been, both from a business. I've done a lot of revamping in my business. I've really started going heavy into mindset work with clients, working with limiting beliefs. I'm loving it and having such a blast. Redefining health and fitness for myself as well. What are my goals next? And to that point earlier, why? Why do I want those things? Again, is it because that's really congruent with myself, or is that because I think I should, or that's what other people say? And so, yeah, just, I guess, living my entire life with more intention and more purpose, because the older I get, and the faster time goes, the more, and I've always said this, but it just becomes more embodied and more true for me every year. It's like, I'm never going to get these years back. I'm never going to get that time back. And I know you lost your mom as well. So periodically I like to check in with myself and just ask myself, if I found out, like my mom did, that I was perhaps going to die in 6 months or a year, would I be, could I live with how I've been living? Like, could I look back and say, like, fuck yeah, that was full send? Or would I be, upset because it wasn't true to myself?
Where can we find you?
I'm on Instagram. My handle is at Allie Cass Health. You can also find me on Facebook at Allie Cass Health. And then my website is www.alliecasshealth.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If this episode brought you value, please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave us a review. We are not normal. We are intentional.